Hello, it's me, Lauren, the Study Skills Advisor here at Jungarendi, and today we are talking about what to avoid in an argumentative essay. Remembering that an essay is ultimately a kind of persuasive and argumentative piece of writing, there are a few key things that we should avoid in order to make our argument as strong as possible. So the first one is unsubstantiated generalizations. This is one of the poor argument techniques that I see most often in student essays. An unsubstantiated generalization is when we attempt to draw a conclusion about an entire group or an idea without any or enough supporting evidence. We tend to do this when we're making blanket statements that attempt to very quickly summarize something. So for example, if I was to say, all Australians love a barbecue. So you might think that this is a kind of efficient way of sharing an idea because, well, maybe most people would agree that it's true. Unfortunately, in academic essays, we just don't want to give our reader any chance to disprove anything that we've said. So even if you mean it in this sort of common knowledge sort of way, it's really important not to use these really big generalizing statements unless you can absolutely prove that in 100% of cases it's true. If you've got the data, then that's great. If not, avoid that all-inclusive kind of language. We can use words that suggest the majority without discounting those who fall outside of it by using words such as may instead of is, or can instead of will, or most instead of all. So I could rephrase my statement to most Australians love a barbecue. Next is isolated individual examples. An isolated individual example is when we use a single, usually anecdotal example to stand in for a whole. Basically, if our sample size is way too low. Typically, we do this when we rely on our own personal experience or that of people we know to support a claim. So for example, if I was to say, my grandpa smoked a pack of cigarettes a day and never got cancer, therefore smoking isn't really dangerous. That's probably not something I can really prove, and it's not based on particularly good evidence. So we really want to use evidence that's consistent, widely accepted, and replicable. Now, as a note, case studies are an exception to this. So case studies do often focus on individual examples, but they do so in a very specific context and in a very specific way. And we usually make very clear links between case studies and much broader population samples and evidence. Finally, we have irrelevant or misleading information. So it's really important to avoid irrelevant or misleading information, and this can include quoting somebody out of context, paraphrasing incorrectly, and cherry picking data. When we're quoting out of context, we're taking words that are technically in what an author said, but not providing the full context for the quote so that it actually ends up misrepresenting what that author was saying. So this is a bit of a general example, but if an author had said, the movie was awful, truly an unforgettable experience, a really terrible, misleading quote would be for them to say, the author said the film was an unforgettable experience. Like, this completely changes the original author's perspective and meaning. And while you probably won't be doing anything quite that obvious, it's really important to remember that you're accurately portraying the context in which an author quoted words. So this also extends to paraphrasing. And really what's important here is ensuring that the original author's perspective, focus, and tone remain consistent. So don't misattribute findings or arguments to authors, even if it's something that they've said in their article. If it's not the main focus or the main argument of the article, don't imply that it is. So if an author is using a particular statistic or a particular fact to back up something they've said, but that's a sort of sideways tangential thing to what they've said, don't say that that's what their argument's about. Provide context to understand what kind of information you're sharing with your reader. And then cherry picking data is where we only use the data that's convenient for our argument and ignore anything that might contradict it. So for example, if I say 9 out of 10 doctors recommend using Colgate toothpaste, but ignore the fact that 9 out of 10 doctors recommend using any toothpaste, I'm misrepresenting the data. So just be really careful when you're using statistics and numbers like this, and that if there are contradictions to certain data that you're using, that you share that with your reader. So there are lots of different kind of argument techniques that aren't great, and I've linked to a bunch of resources in the blog. I also recommend Hay, Bochner and Dungy's Making the Grade. They have some really great examples of argument techniques to avoid. And that's all in the essay writing series, but don't worry, because I'll be giving a bunch of new blogs in the future about some related skills such as academic writing, referencing and research. So keep an eye out for those in the future. And in the meantime, let me know if you've got any suggestions for anything else or how your essays have been going.